Grayson Grundhoefer, Sikkim365.com recruiting analyst with us here. And Grayson, it is week 0 of the college football season, which means Baylor still just 1 week away. They're not a week 0 team, which I am thrilled about. To me, I don't want any team that I cover or watch to play in week 0, except like Florida State's going to Ireland next year. I'd be for it if I was Notre Dame or Navy. Like, that's exciting. But if you're going to play just a regular lame home game, I'd rather just wait until the next week.
Oh, I agree 100% with you. It's kind of this weird time period where you're just playing a random game on a weekend where there's not very many big, high-profile games. So, like for USC, for instance, I think they play San Jose State. It just feels kind of out of nowhere. Now, you are basically the only game on TV that people will care about. I mean, there's a couple other ones, but, you know, all eyes are going to kind of be on Notre Dame and USC, which I guess that's kind of a perk with it, just because those are one of the, you know, 2 of the few teams that are actually high profile that are playing on week 0. But I agree with you. I wouldn't want to play week 0 either.
Okay, Grayson, the Baylor depth chart, you know, obviously this is their last day of like non-game prep, theoretically, although I think they've probably already kind of started that, getting ready for Texas State in week 1. What depth chart surprises do you think we'll see?
You know, I think that one that's kind of popped up recently is the fact that Tate Williams has been playing some right tackle. And, you know, through the spring and even through the fall, for most of it at least, it was basically Caden Siraki versus Elijah Ellis. They were kind of battling to play right tackle. And then over the last couple of weeks, Tate Williams has gotten some reps at right tackle. Caden Siraki's been playing some right guard. So I'm wondering if that is something that we actually see on paper, or if Tate Williams just ends up sticking at guard and right tackle like we originally thought was going to happen. So I guess that's one of them. You know, cornerback is going to be rather interesting just because we're still awaiting to figure out the status of Ajani Carter as far as, you know, when is he actually going to be on campus and practicing, practicing being the big part of that. And does that impact him actually being on the depth chart, at least the initial depth chart? Because you wonder, you know, if they're going to put out the depth chart on Monday, and if he hasn't practiced still, or maybe his first practice is Monday or Tuesday, I can't imagine that they would put him anywhere on the depth chart. But that's going to be something that I'll be looking at, as well as also, you know, just seeing how the other cornerbacks shake out, if it's going to be Chateau Reed and Kevin Williams, or if Isaiah Dunston sneaks in there and takes one of the spots. But outside of that, you know, I think Baylor's pretty much, the depth chart seems rather set. I mean, there's a couple other position battles, but in general, I think you can predict most of them. But then again, we've seen in the past, there's always a random one here or there that always pops up.
Yeah. If a Johnny Carter starts after just 1 week of practice, that is either really good news or really bad news.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, you can only look at it one of those 2 ways, and I would say that it's probably bad news if he's starting immediately, because especially against Texas State, like, you'll probably go with the guys who have been there, who have been kind of you know, practicing and taking majority of the reps. I would think that you would start those guys and then maybe get a Johnny Carter more ready for the Utah game. So that's my expectation. So you're exactly right. It'd probably be pretty bad if he just, you know, shows up and only practices for a week and then he's the starting cornerback. Even though I do think you could see him mixed in throughout the game, I don't believe that he'll be starting.
Well, here's the thing, and the reason it could be really good news is he just shows up and he's the truth, right? Like, oh man, like, all right,
yeah,
well, that's a miracle. But yeah, it's either a miracle or a tragedy. There's not really an in between on that.
Yeah, and I mean that's very true. I do think that, you know, even if he does show up and he's clearly the best cornerback on the roster, I still don't think that you should start him for the first game. But that's just more of like a preference thing. That's not necessarily something that, you know, the coaching staff's going to look at, because if he shows up and he's just better than everyone, I mean, you know, you usually say, hey, just play the best player. And so maybe that's what ends up happening. Either way, there's going to be a rotation there at that cornerback position. So it's not really something that I think is going to be a huge deal going into week 1.
Yeah. Grayson, the Texas State last year gave Baylor a better run for their money than they than I think they expected. This is obviously new coaching staff and everything that's gone on there. Do you expect them to be ready to throw a charge into Baylor, or do you think that Baylor, given everything that's happened at Texas State and everything that's happened with the roster with the Bears, be more ready than they were just a year ago?
I fully expect that Texas State's going to come out and try to throw the football all over the field. And, I mean, G.J. Kinney is there now, and he had a great run there at Incarnate Word. They put up a ton of points while he was there and got really good quarterback play, especially from Lindsey Scott. And so, you know, I don't think Texas State has those same kind of athletes on the roster, but I do think that they're going to have the ability to throw the ball some on Baylor and create some explosive plays here and there. So I do think they'll have some success, but I think in general, Baylor's probably going to win this game rather easily. I know Texas State was somewhat, you know, in the game last year for the whole game, but it ended up being like 42-7, I think. So it wasn't exactly super close. And I mean, Baylor was a 30-point favorite and they won by 35. So they covered actually rather easily. So I kind of expect similar things, but I do think Texas State will probably score more than 7 points like they did a year ago.
So recruiting-wise, right now the focus is on the season, but where do you see things churning for the Bears as the season starts and you start to try to lock down some of those guys before they get in too deep into their seasons?
For sure. So a big thing for Baylor right now is the 2025 class, because you're going to have a lot of those guys visiting on campus and you're going to try to get off to a good start, which they already have 2 commits in that class. And so now you're just trying to build on that and build on that momentum throughout the season. Now, as far as the 2024 class goes, you're going to want to bring guys on who you're still probably evaluating, or guys that you have interest in that you know, maybe didn't show that same interest early in their recruitment, but maybe now they'll have more interest, and you bring them to Baylor, and then you're able to kind of continue building those relationships. But I would say in general, for the most part, if you look through kind of the history of recruiting for Baylor, it's pretty much going to be a situation where you're going to have a lot of the commits on campus during the season. You're going to have a lot of 2025, 2026 prospects who come to games and visit. And then at the end of the year is where you'll really focus on kind of rounding out the 2024 class. Now, they still have some targets they're going after, but I think the end of the year, kind of, you know, that right before the early signing day and then also before the February signing day, you'll see them really kind of ramp that up even more and potentially bring guys on late official visits, which they've done in previous years as well. So that's kind of where they're at. They still have some spots available in a 2024 class, but not a ton. And then 2025, 2026, they're just trying to continue, you know, getting off to a hot start and building that momentum.
All right. So are you comfortable making a prediction on the Baylor season right now?
I am actually. I'm pretty comfortable in the Big 12 season. I'm through, I believe, 11 weeks on my series on Stick 'em 365. So I feel pretty good about how they're going to finish. Do you want my prediction right now, or do you want to save it?
No, I do. Here's the thing. I think I told you this when I saw you the other day. I have less of a grasp on all this than any, and it's not because of not trying. It's just they have more questions than I think of any time I've covered them outside of the COVID year, which I mean was one big question mark for every team in the country. But outside of the COVID year, every year I've covered them since maybe the second or third year of Art Briles.
Yeah, I mean there have been some weird years in there. Like 2016, obviously was a very weird one, and then Matt Rule's first year in 2017. Just hard to know what to expect, right? But I think, you know, for this team in particular, I think that there are a lot of question marks, but I think the way they handled this offseason with the additions they made in the transfer portal and how aggressive they were to fix the roster and how open they've been and honest they've been about mistakes from a year ago and how much we've seen that shift this offseason, I think that's great news. And I would also say the other big thing I think that maybe people are overlooking a little bit is just the simple fact that you look through the Big 12 and there's a lot of solid teams, but there aren't a bunch of great teams. I think some people think Texas is great. I think they're good. I think they're probably really good. I don't think they're a great team. That's not a game that is unwinnable for Baylor. And you look at the rest of the schedule, I mean, they're facing a lot of teams who I don't think are going to be, very good this year. I mean, you look at Cincinnati, Iowa State, Houston, and West Virginia. I don't think any of those 4 teams are making a bowl. So if you just throw those on there, I mean, that's 4 wins. You take Long Island and Texas State, now you're at 6 wins. I mean, and you look at the rest of their schedule, they get Texas at home, Utah at home, Texas Tech at home. And yeah, they go on the road to Kansas State and TCU, but I think in general, this is a great schedule that sets up really well for Baylor. And as I've gone and looked more through it and looked through the other teams in the conference and really tried to get a grasp for what I feel like each team will be, I actually think Baylor's probably closer to a 9-3 team than a 6-6 or 7-5 team.
I do agree with that. 9-3 is hard for me to totally wrap my head around, but I do think that this team will be better. Just talking with the coaches, you feel like there's a bit of a weight lifted and a confidence about them, and that they know. I think they were probably in the position I am now last year, where they kind of expected, but they didn't know. I think now they kind of know a little bit more what they have. They expected some guys to step up that just kind of collectively didn't. That was maybe the weirdest thing, is that it wasn't just 1 or 2 things that didn't work out. Good teams always have those. Georgia will have those this year, right, Grayson, where you think, man, this guy's going to be the really great addition at wide receiver. He's going to score a bunch of touchdowns because he's going to be a matchup problem, and we've got good guys on the other side, blah, 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 and then he just doesn't. You get a couple of those every year. Baylor had about 7 of those that all kind of happened simultaneously a year ago. I don't see that happening again.
I agree with you. And if you even look deeper than that, I mean, last year, the BYU game, and I think the coaches have pretty much admitted that they just did not show up to the level that they needed to for that BYU game. And I think, again, it had a lot to do with complacency. But, that game, the West Virginia game, where Blake Shapen is literally having a career day, and then he gets hurt, and they end up losing that game on the road. The TCU game, where it's late in the year and everyone already knows Baylor has all these problems, and they're not a very good team at that point in the season. And they still probably, you could say, should have beaten TCU. I actually feel pretty confident in saying that. And if they win those 3 games, last year is so different. And so that's the thing in the Big 12. You have a lot of close games. You got to figure out a way to finish them. But in general, I think Baylor is better set up to do that this year with the pieces that they have, with Blake Shapen being older, more experienced. Everyone forgets last year was his first season as a starting quarterback. I think he's going to be a lot better this time around and more comfortable in the offense. And then in general, I think a Dave Aranda defense will never be as bad as they were last year, 2 years in a row. I don't see that as a possibility. He's too good of a coach to allow that to happen. And so you put all that together, and I just really feel confident that Baylor's going to be better, if not a lot better than last year's team, and I think it'll show with the record. Grayson
Grundhoefer, SicEm365.com. If you're not subscribed to the website, go ahead and do it. We always have great deals going on there. And read his stuff. It's really good on recruiting. And you're 11 teams, so that means you got 3 more to go?
Yeah, I got 2 more weeks left, and then I got bowl projections.
Okay.
Next week. So I'll have bowl projections, but I will give a little sneak hint. I do have Baylor going 9-3. That is kind of where I've settled on them for this season.
Okay. A confident Grayson Grundhoefer here on 365 Sports. Grayson, we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
That's Grayson Grundhoefer, SicEm365.com. You can check